Good evening, everyone. My name is Josephine Jones, and I direct programs in the Colorado Center for the Book for Colorado Humanities. Everything we do at Colorado Humanities is a team effort, and I would particularly like to thank Abby Kerstetter for taking the lead on Colorado Book Awards in these challenging times, Chris Goff working behind the scenes tonight for her continued support now as technical producer, our board of directors, and the army of volunteers who selected the finalist books. And although we're still online this year instead of snug in the book bar, you can still purchase books through the Book Bar's website. Book Bar is still our host for the readings and will gladly mail them to you. Now, our sponsors also continue their support. Denver-based Outskirts Press, a longtime sponsor of the Colorado Center for the Book, stands ready to help authors develop, publish, and market their books. And Colorado Sun is also providing funding and is featuring weekly Sunlit excerpts and interviews from many of our Colorado authors' books. We want to thank them, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and all of you for being here. Let's all use hashtag Celebrate Story and hashtag Colorado Book Awards as we post about our experiences with the finalists and their work. Now, I'm pleased to introduce you to Joseph Hutchison, who will be introducing our finalists this evening and serving as our MC for the Q&As. Former Colorado Poet Laureate Joseph Hutchison has published 19 poetry collections, including The World As Is, New and Selected Poems, 1972 to 2015, Marked Men, and Bed of Coals, which won the Colorado Poetry Award. His poetry, fiction, and essays have appeared in many anthologies and over 100 journals, including Agni Review, Cutthroat, Kentucky Review, Pedestal Magazine, Poetry Chicago, and Poetry Salzburg Review. His latest collection, Under Sleep's New Moon, is forthcoming this summer from NYQ Books. Joe lives in the mountains southwest of Denver and directs the Professional Creative Writing Program at the University of Denver University College. Joe, welcome and thank you so much.
Thank you. I have to unmute myself here and refer to the script, which says, Joe says a few words. So the few words I have to say is I'm excited to be emceeing an event like this. Literary fiction and poetry go together in part because they value language at a level that may not be akin to any other genre. So this is exciting to me. What we're going to be doing is we'll have a Q&A with the authors for each category after the category is read. So at the end of the poetry category, we'll have questions about for the poets about their poetry and go from there. If you have questions, please type them in to the comments and that will be good. We'll track those and get them answered later. Let's begin with poetry. Our first finalist is Aaron Anstett for his collection This Way to the Grand As Is, New and Collected Poems. Aaron's previous collections are Please State the Nature of Your Emergency. I'll be emailing Aaron separately about that on my own case. Moreover, insofar as heretofore, each place the bodies and no accident and sustenance. Among other honors, his work has received the Nebraska Book Award, the Backwaters Prize, and the Balcones Poetry Prize, and he has served as a regional poet laureate, instituting a continuing program that places the work of local writers in waiting areas. He lives in Colorado. Aaron, have at it. Aaron, I fear you are muted.
How's that, Joseph? Can you hear me? Okay. What I was saying is that it's an honor to be here, and I'm deeply grateful and honored and humbled to have my book be considered among such other powerful collections as our next two readers are going to read from today. I'm going to read a bunch of poems, and it's a tight 7 minutes. I'm going to click my stopwatch and go. This first poem is called Plea, and it posits that technology is kind of a higher power. Alexa, help me decrease my surface area. Then go live in sepia tone cabin on the label of bottle of bourbon, an imagined idealized Kentucky. Never a slave state nor home to continued mountaintop removal, but birthplace still of Abraham Lincoln, Loretta Lynn, Harry Dean Stanton, Muhammad Ali. Alexa, from the cross-hatched chimney trickles a scribble of wood smoke, and through a window you see a thin and tiny me reading in rocking chair, bottle on table, image on label, infinitely repeating. Alexa, how many days left? Not mine alone, but everyone's. Alexa, what shall we do or say to lessen suffering? Alexa, when will we at last infiltrate the kingdom of heaven? Alexa, how do we gain immunity from prosecution for our many crimes and sins? Alexa, how can I and the entire extended human family enter witness protection, but instead of Southwest desert or Midwest suburb, different, better planet and/or dimension? Alexa, a hummingbird in the orchard swoops from apples to peaches. Alexa, please. And this one is called The Sonnet Again Enjoys a Moment. The real and imagined seem opponents. The world's first raspberry-picking robot plucks the crop and gingerly deposits it into punnets, plastic mesh baskets for gathering vegetables and fruit. The whole process takes about a minute for a single berry. Modern sonnets on the ascendant, more and more wanted, can be quickly transported to markets, every apparatus running full tilt. Of displaced labor, the text keeps silent. A poem tries to make things equivalent. Harvests and fixed forms, couplets and hilltops. Miniature suns glimmer in dewdrops. History. No one in this world remembers making love in 1648, though somebody must have, maybe everyone did, or recalls the exact angle to which a sparrow bent a pine branch afterwards, shaking loose a little rain nestled in the needles there, or can say with any certainty what that sounded like, whether breath or skin against skin or nothing. It's a title poem from my first book called Sustenance. I want to be pulled down the street by thousands of finches, each with a twine leash, nothing fancy, 1 block only through the brazen afternoon. Hopping and walking, they'll haul me easily. I'm a thin man who whoop on his toy sled, pitching bread scraps ahead of them, their skinny legs a blur. True to my word, I'll halt at the corner, unbridle each bird, and each will fly off with its own string, my blessings on their nests. I've half a mind to weigh so little I balance in one hand, my grandfathers say, suddenly alive again. I want to feel so good it's a faith I take with me, like food or money. A sound I can count on, keen as metal runners rasping asphalt. A prayer I say, and the birds return. This poem is called Indeed I Was. It's a ghazal, which has a repeated word at the end of every other line, and the first 2 lines, you'll figure out quickly what that repeated word is. Indeed I was. Skinny then, little more than skeleton, naked next to an actual skeleton, my memento mori 3D X-ray. The professor lifted each bare limb, then made me mimic the skeleton's positions, asking the anatomy art class to see the bones in my skin match the skeleton's poses. Easy to see so early and cold on plywood stage in a studio, how soon I'd be a skeleton. What little dress of hair-on-end flesh above tibia and ulna, cranium, mandible, fluorescence on the skeleton and me merciless, and a square of skylight sun. Charcoal and pencils scratched. I didn't ask whose skeleton or exclaim, alas, poor, the palm of my hand open like the skeleton's, eyes above easels everywhere, clothed legs below. On their sketch pads, I imagined me and the skeleton synchronized. Tai Chi, Rockettes, country line dancing, me on a bar floor, skeleton kicking my undressed ribs. Now, Mr. Anstett, Professor something said, if you could embrace the skeleton. This one's called Onlookers. Watching Ferris wheel unhinge, then roll through carnival, outsized and awful, a long way through midway before final rickety wobble, like coin across bar floor or hubcap after accident. Cries from other rides and it a general blend. Some among us, one supposes, thought even then thirst, bills, disasters on television, rescind an anagram of cinders, Snoopy of weapons. This did not happen. Much else did. And my final poem, Autumn Morning in Philadelphia. I choose to believe the evidence of a world before or after I'm in it, hoax and fake as some have claimed, dinosaur bones and fossils salted across the earth by God to test our faith. Yet all over this city, mothers serenade babies in many languages, and in the courtyard around Independence Hall, chestnut and elm leaves fall in patterns never the exact same again, large as the parchment of historical documents. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. That's wonderful stuff. I especially liked Miniature Suns and Dewdrops. I think Isa would have liked to have stolen that if he had come after you in history, but he didn't. So there you go. Our next finalist is Linda Hogan for A History of Kindness. Recipient of the 2007 Mountains of Plains Booksellers Spirit of the West Literary Achievement Award. Linda Hogan is a Chickasaw poet, novelist, essayist, playwright, teacher, and activist who has spent most of her life in Oklahoma and Colorado. She does so much. It's kind of amazing. Her fiction has garnered many honors, including a Pulitzer Prize nomination, and her poetry collection has received the American Book Award, Colorado Book Award, and the National Book Critics Circle nomination. A volunteer and consultant for wildlife rehabilitation and endangered species programs, Linda Hogan has also published essays with the Nature Conservancy and the Sierra Club. Linda, welcome.
Thank you, Joe. It's wonderful to be here and to be with the other writers who have done well. I'm going to read a few poems from A History of Kindness and try to stay with the 5 minutes, which probably won't be hard. So the first one I'm going to read is, first, before I read, let me tell you that I have a cat going crazy right in here, picking up things and moving them. So if you hear noise, ignore it. I saw them dancing. They were not two males in a territorial battle, but does lifting their legs and small hooves before bowing to one another in respect, ending their dance, then curling back down near each other around their young in the long spring grasses. I remember the bend in the road when I carried my woven basket of branches and saw the two does dance. It was the season of trees blooming after a rain, and in the ray of light, the last of day, were other inhabitants. They carry only their beauty to shine this land. It was the season when blue dragonflies weave about all the other creatures. The spiders drop down on elegant strands. They say are stronger than we can create. Each life says to the other, yes, you are an animal. You are a song. You are a runner, a flyer. You are so alive. We were all created together with this herd of twilight dancers, more than one. Then they went into the tangle of thickets this woman can never follow. The mountain between where I live by Bear Creek, above Bear Creek, and with a small creek that goes by the house also towards Bear Creek. Bear Creek is where a war was decided a long time ago. Down at Bear Creek, running through our town, is where the Sand Creek Massacre was planned. From down there, up the mountain and down into a valley, is the hidden little cabin where I live. Old Mother closed her eyes when I learned this. She said, "Good thing there is a mountain between you and those words." I grew up during a time of relocation in part, and my uncle came to the Denver area where he started the White Buffalo Council to help other people coming in from relocation. He was sent here on a bus like other people with promises from the American government that were never delivered about what would happen to them when they got there. So he wanted to get together some people who would feed others, find housing, help them find jobs. And so it was a multicultural experience, and the people from all nations were here. So when I was a girl, the old women told me if I were always generous, I could paint a red part in the middle of my hair with red ochre, red paint, red lipstick, some even used. But it seemed not right to reveal to the world that I was generous, as if the announcement takes it back. So, unlike other girls, I appeared selfish, even if I gave away so much. And who would know I gave my buckskin dress, my leggings and moccasins beaded so well, even the silver combs for my hair. I think of the many red parts, even the parting of the sea by Moses leading his people in a never-ending story, or the parting of the red stem of the plant for healing bad lungs, the splitting of the heart when one side works against the other, and the veins in their miles flow back again and again. But the red part I recall the most had to do with generosity, and then our giving up the taken land and forest to those who wanted it so. We parted with our clothing, our families, and on our way we left the red farewell of a blood trail along the land we walked. It looked like writing that became the book coming after us with the words of truth. A history of kindness. When a child becomes an animal in clouds, changing forms to other creatures, our grief has become a kindness to the sky. When the hay is baled and you worry, what if a mouse or snake was inside? That is a gentleness. When the horses are fed and all that's left is a withered apple for the woman to eat, and she is grateful for the life of all things, so she feeds it to the horse. That is a good heart. When you are gentle to the skin of others, touching them softly, speaking with gentle words, it is compassion. When there is agreement among those who might have argued instead, it is a gift to all. When skin is the first organ to form in the body of a woman, and skin is the largest organ we have, this is a mother's first protection. If you still love that invisible place where a child once stood, the heart recalling her soft hair, her long dark legs, that is the spaciousness of memory. And when you pick up the old woman on the worn road to help her home, and you see that inside she has nothing, you give her the food you have. You give your only can of coffee, then start her wood stove and leave your coat behind on purpose. What else would a real human do?
Thank you, Linda. Beautiful work, humane work. It's wonderful to have you out there doing that humane work. Our last finalist in the poetry category is Khadijah Queen, and she is on the list for her book Anodyne. Khadijah is the author of Conduit, Black Peculiar, Fearful Beloved, Non Sequitur, and I'm So Fine, a list of famous men and what I had on. A finalist for the National Poetry Series, the Balcones Poetry Prize, and the CLMP Firecracker Award in Fiction. She is an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Colorado at Boulder and serves as core faculty for the low residency Mile High MFA program at Regis University.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you to the readers for this honor, and thank you to Abby, Chris, Josephine, and all the organizers and everyone for attending tonight. It's such a thrill to read with Erin and Linda. And I'll just share 3 poems from Anodyne. In the event of an apocalypse, be ready to die. But do also remember galleries, gardens, herbaria, repositories of beauty now ruined to find exquisite, untidy, untended loveliness of the forsaken, of dirt-studded and mold-streaked treasures that no longer belong to anyone alive, overrunning and overflowingly unkempt monuments to the disappeared. Chronicle the heroes and mothers, artisans who went to the end of the line, protectors and cowards. Remember when pain was not to be seen or looked at, but institutionalized, invisible, unspoken, transformed but not really transformed, covered up with made-up valor or resilience. Some people are not worth saving, no one wants to say, but they say it in judgment. They say it in looking away. They say it in staying safe in a lane created by someone afraid of losing ground, thinking, I doubt we're much to look at as we swallow what has to hurt until we can sing sharp as blades. aiming for the sensational as we settle for the ordinary, avoiding evidence of suffering at all costs, and reach clone-like into the ground as aspen roots, or slide, feet first down a soft slope, wet, cold. But the faith to fall toward the unseen, the bleak of most memory, call it elusive, call it the fantasy to end all fantasies, awaiting fatality, blight of both education and habit. Warned, inert, we could watch ourselves, foolish, lose it all. Anodyne. I wish I'd learned to take better care, as if this world tried to love me, a body I used up on hard ground, flowsy and sop-studded, losing words. I keep moving and settle for pain. Pitch breaks in, body leaning into quiet I couldn't ask for, what I needed and couldn't afford. A shun, undone, a hush, a shudder through thinned fascicles of flesh and flimsy bone, walkward in a lost idiom. Are we on a heartway? We could pretend. Calculate how immaculate hardship covets itself. Acts like it aches for more. Antediluvian. Where were you when the truth disappeared, or when the truth battered us and we pretended fear fell from the ripped pillow of our sky instead of rising up from the one clear place of us? Where were you when strong men told us to die and blasted us into nothing? Were you downtown to witness the smooth mirage stagnate in skyscraper shade and neon glower? Did you hop a bus and clutch a cold center rail, the sweat of your palm making you slip as if at sea? Were you at sea in memory, gathered into lyric, your body pretending any era was a safe one? 6 persimmons ripen unconsumed. Mayfly wings flash their iridescence in the dark. Nothing works. By swallowing alarm, you scrapped what you knew near plaza fountains, ultra anonymous. Now, an arrowhead sharpens the blood under our flesh. Low to the ground, a sea of tamarisks. You claim millennia led to the false obelisks, led to what severs the head of connection in the time of least. But we only ask that you not kill us. Thank you very much.
Oh, Khadijah, thank you. It's beautiful. I don't know if there are any questions that are being asked, but maybe we'll hold on to those and see if we are get some at the end. Oh, Khadijah is appearing. Aaron is appearing with Linda. Wonderful, the poets of 2021. Good luck to all of you. Beautiful stuff. Great to have you here. Okay. Well, I don't see any questions. Somebody remarked that, Abby said she can't wait to read and teach these poems. That is something I've been pondering, how it is that any literary work achieves longevity. And one of the ways is where teachers pick it up and use it in the classroom and pass it on to other generations. I don't think we can rely on everybody buying our books. It comes down to having champions, and I hope there are a bunch of champions out there. So I do have some questions, but I'll just ask some of my own. Let me ask a few. Let me start with Aaron. Aaron, you have a tremendous sense of wit and playfulness around words and concepts. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about how you developed that. You certainly weren't that way at age 5, I don't think.
I don't recall, but probably not. Although I I think I've always long had an inherited wide smart aleck streak. I was going to use a different word. I could go ahead and use that different word. You know what word I meant. The house I grew up in, I was fortunate that we had books around, and we didn't have much else, but we had books and we had words, and verbal combat and witticism was kind of a way of being in my house as a child. And I read a lot, and honestly, I've known many poets, particularly male poets, who are failed rock stars. That they wanted to play the guitar and write songs and be famous. I'm probably a failed stand-up. That's probably what I aspire to be at some point. But I think some of the work I read early and certainly didn't understand early contributed to that. I fell into John Donne, as a teenager, and Bill Knott, and other folks who are using a lot of conceits and jokes and so on. And I heard long ago that humor is kind of the lure, right? It's kind of the way to get a reader into the poem, and then you punch them in the gut. You make them laugh, and then you open them up to other possibilities. But yeah, I'm just going to blame genetics and upbringing.
Why not? It's always worked for me. That's great, Aaron. Linda, I had a question for you. The range of your work over the years has been vast. But one of the unifying themes is the natural world, the world of animals, and my impression is that you see the world of humans as an extension of the world of animals, and not the other way around, where we're at the top and all the animals are at our service. Is that correct? Am I reading that correctly?
That's correct. That's a traditional view that I grew up with, and most of us do. And the human is not at the top of some chain. Actually, the person what was his name, Llewellyn, that came up with the categories of all the animals and plants, and he got those from the Sami people up in Norway. He didn't invent them himself, but you have to go back through all the histories. And the truth really is that we are just another animal, and we have our place in the world, and we have our kind of intelligence. And I live in a wildlife corridor, so I live with mountain lions, bears, all kinds of other, like amazing crows that have great intelligence. And so I realized that I do research and I study what each of them knows, like prairie dog languages, which are able to make a complete sentence, a syntax, and describe people that walk by. And finally, National Geographic picked up on that years ago, but it took them a long time. And so we are only part of the world intelligence and not very much of it.
Well, that's why one of the things I appreciate about the title of your book is that it touches on kindness, but also the root of kindness being kin, and that everyone is kin, and I like that.
Last year also, the Radiant Lives of Animals came out, essays about this corridor. And then it has a second part of the book that's not yet published.
Well, I look forward to that. I've got the book.
Me too. I don't have any publisher right now. You have the book. Good.
Yes.
I had a question for Khadijah that I wrote.
Ask away.
Do you want me to ask it instead of?
You go ahead and ask it. Sure.
Okay. Is it still there? I wanted to know about pain. If some of the pain you write is about not just spirit pain and heart pain and culture pain, but if some of it is also about physical chronic pain.
Yes, thank you for asking that question. And certainly, I'm not shy about talking about the fact that I live with disability, that I'm a disabled person, and I have fibromyalgia and some other issues related to my service in the military. So I talk about it in, I think, Fear of a Beloved, and in this book as well. And I'm actually teaching this weekend with Zooglosia, which is an organization for disabled writers. So the answer is yes.
I would love to talk to you about that some more because I'm also disabled.
That would be wonderful. I would love to chat about that.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Great. All right, thank you guys. We'll circle back and see if anybody else has
your phone number.
Oh,
could you write it down somewhere?
Put it in the chat.
Yeah.
I bet you that
we'll link it through Abby.
Okay.
Okay, great.
I want to do a book.
Good. Well, okay. So we're going to move on to the literary fiction finalists. And first on my list is Andrew Altschul, is the author of the novels The Gringa, Deus Ex Machina, and Lady Lazarus. His short fiction and essays have appeared in Esquire, McSweeney's, The Wall Street Journal. How do you get fiction for Wall Street Journal? I'll have to talk to you about that later. Plowshares, Fence, One Story, and other publications, and anthologies including The Best American Non-Required Reading, Best New American Voices, and the O. Henry Prize Stories. Former Wallace Stegner Fellow and Jones Lecturer at Stanford University. He has received fellowships from the Rockefeller Foundation, Bellagio Center, the UCross Foundation, and the Fundación Valparaíso. He is the director of the Creative Writing Program at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Joe. Thanks to everyone watching tonight, and thanks to Colorado Humanities for the great honor of this nomination, and congratulations to the other finalists. The Gringa is loosely based on the story of an American woman who was arrested in Lima, Peru in the 1990s for collaborating with a leftist militant group designated as terrorists by the Peruvian government. She was convicted of treason and sentenced to life in a military prison. The section of the book I'm going to read from is looking into Leonora Gelb's earlier life and her radicalization, trying to understand who she was and how she got there. In this scene, she's a senior at Stanford University on the eve of the first Gulf War and the invasion of Iraq. And the only other thing you'd need to know is that she has an on-again, off-again boyfriend named Martin Lee, a graduate student, a passionate activist who's Black. In San Francisco's Civic Center the next day, she followed Martin through a crowd of thousands, a surly and liquid mass that swelled and shifted, insinuating itself between buildings, swamping police lines, thumping drums and clanging pots and pans in an endless rattle that set the nerves on edge. The weather had cleared, the sky packed with fist-shaped clouds. Speakers shouted into bullhorns, cursing President Bush. Signs stabbed the air, no blood for oil, fags against war, as waves of outrage rolled through the plaza in deep orgasmic shudders. She hadn't eaten. Hunger and the buzz of coffee brought a sweat to her hairline. Unshowered under her long-sleeved shirt, she could smell her own slightly horsey scent mixed with his sharp musk. She was supposed to be in the library working on an art history paper. While the bombs fell, while innocent people were maimed and incinerated, she was supposed to write a paper on Caravaggio. Unthinkable. She knew this was how most people lived, by somehow finding ways to write papers on Caravaggio while children in other countries were murdered, but Leonora would not be like most people. If you're doing this, you got to be ready, Martin said at dawn. He told her to wear black, to take off her rings, to leave her ID at home. They'd taken the train from Palo Alto, and Leo practiced glaring at well-dressed commuters until they turned away. As the sun moved behind the stately buildings, the undertow shifted toward Market Street and the financial district. The crowd was still growing, fed by side streets, a cacophony of car horns met by angry howls. Leo's pulse banged in her head. Cops in riot gear lined the sidewalk. the crack of glass bottles against plastic shields, metal thuds as bodies were thrown across the hoods of cars. Marden pulled her through the current and into a courtyard where a dozen men and women clustered nervously. A pink-faced teenager with a shaved head and full-sleeve tattoos handed out ski masks. Leo clutched hers in both hands. "You can still go home," Marden said. "Vámonos," the tattooed kid said. As they neared Powell Street, the crowd barely moving, Leo kept her eyes on Marden's back. Into her head came a litany of things she needed to do, the Caravaggio paper, another on Plath and Sexton. It was her turn to clean the co-op kitchen. Her father's birthday was next week, and she still hadn't bought him a gift. Her stomach hardened into a hot nut. Children were going to die for no reason, she reminded herself. What did Renaissance art matter? A few feet away, a naked woman painted with blue and orange flames hurled herself at a policeman. "You fucking murderers! You baby killers!" The cop barely got his shield up in time. 3 others grabbed the woman's flailing limbs as a 4th pulled a canister from his belt and sprayed her in the eyes. Leo felt herself duck, felt something whiz overhead, and then a great shattering as the window of a shoe store evaporated. Her mind whirled. This was the real thing, not a lecture or a photograph. "Wait," Leo said, snatching at Marden's sleeve. He shrugged her off. The air was suddenly bitter with smoke. "Where are we going?" But he was already forging ahead. Someone handed her a length of heavy pipe, and then they were pushed apart by a riptide of bodies in skin-tight skeleton suits who rushed across the street, leaping onto cars and barreled full force into the police line. At the next intersection, the Chevron building soared skyward out of a cloud of white smoke. Its gilded revolving doors were guarded by an arc of police cruisers and orange water barrels, beyond which was mayhem, cops and protesters colliding, spinning in pairs as if it were a lurid high school dance. She couldn't find Marden, couldn't breathe through the smell of gasoline. The pipe hung heavy at her side. A surge in the crowd knocked her off balance, and when she righted herself, they were sprinting past, a dozen bodies in black masks smashing into the cops with loud grunts and the clamor of metal on pavement, and then she was running after them, struggling to get closer to those golden doors. She could hear herself screaming. She stumbled and went down, and a pile of bodies fell on top of her and rolled and quickly scattered. As she climbed to her feet, a skeleton suit barreled into her, and she shoved him back with an animal cry and shook herself free. She pushed forward until she was a dozen yards from the revolving doors. When the smoke briefly cleared, she saw a body on the ground, set upon by 5 cops, one of whom tore off the attacker's mask, while the rest slammed nightsticks at his limbs, drove the butts into his belly, and kicked at his ribs. She couldn't move. The sirens wailed, and the man on the ground curled up and rolled side to side, but she could not make herself move forward. When the cop holding the mask took a running step and aimed his boot at Marden's head, Leo dropped the pipe she was still holding and ran. Eyes streaming, she elbowed across the current, stumbled on bottles and bricks, and tripped at the curb, tearing the flesh from her palms as she fell. She dodged through a gap in the police line, at each intersection turning from smoke and noise into the eerie stillness of downtown. On a dark corner, she stopped to pull off the mask and retch hot mucus into a trash can. A fire engine screamed past, and she started to run again. In Union Square, there were cops everywhere, lining every sidewalk. She wiped her nose, spat in the gutter, and ducked into the first set of doors to stand blinking and heaving in the crystal white light of Macy's perfume department. Later that night, the war would begin. Baghdad lit up with tracer fire, glowing submarine green on CNN, the silent and unreal world of alien life forms doomed to extinction. There would be tomcats and prowlers, hellfire and scuds, bombs that found their targets and bombs that found something else. And through it all came the bland assurances of the president, who that first night explained to us, there are things worth fighting for. But in this moment, there was only the chilly light of the showroom, the tick and buzz of fluorescence, the whispers of customers at the sight of the girl in black with a livid face and bleeding hands. "Is there something I can help you with?" A skinny saleswoman stood flanked by 2 coworkers at the Chanel counter, trying to maintain their staged elegance. Leah was shaky-kneed, her blood pounding. "I'm okay," she said. Police cars wailed past on Stockton Street, blue light fracturing across the mirrored counters. "I'm sorry," said the saleswoman, "but you'll have to leave." Leo forced her breathing to slow. "I'm looking for the men's department," she said. The woman folded her arms. Willing her hand not to shake, Leo took her Stanford Visa card from her pocket and summoned a voice learned in the shopping malls of her youth. I'm here to buy a birthday present for my father. Is there a problem? Before they could reply, she spotted the escalator and strode past the women with chin high. She rode up 3 flights, swallowing ripples of sobs, washed her face in the ladies' room and browsed a good long time, until her eyes dried, her limbs stopped shaking, until she found the perfect gift, a silk tie, an abstract blaze of blue and red, designed, the label said, by Jerry Garcia. Thank you. You're muted, Joe.
I have that tie. I do.
It's a good one.
That's scary. Okay. Wonderful. Wow, such energy. That's great stuff. All right. Our next finalist is the literary fiction in the literary fiction category. It's the tie that's hanging me up. It's Dylan Fisher. Dylan is currently an MFA candidate in creative writing at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. The Loneliest Band in France, his first book, was the winner of the Texas Review Press's 2019 Clay Reynolds Novella Prize and selected as a 2020 concours by the American Library in Paris. Welcome, Dylan.
Thank you. So yeah, thank you, Joe. I'm so grateful to be here virtually with you all. And I'll give a little context. The Loneliest Band in France is made up of a handful of sentences, so not just like 5 or 6. So I'll be reading a portion of one sentence today. Here, the narrator, Megara, a Sri Lankan law student studying abroad in France, has been recruited to join the titular band, the Loneliest Band in France, which claims to have a song that can kill its listeners. And so in this scene, he's at a cafe called the Café Bovary with a member of the band, Noel, and a friend from university, Maria, and this is in the hours leading up to the band's debut performance. And I think that's all you need to know. Okay. I said, "You're kidding, right? This is France, with everything I'd ever want." And Noel said, "I've lived here all my life, but nothing good has come of it yet." The waiter moving closer as he said this, hanging off Noel's every word, drooling and foaming at the mouth, making me nervous enough to say, "I think we need to go. We shouldn't be here." Worried on one hand that the waiter would turn us into the local police, and on the other, worried he would force us to stay, to simmer in the process of destroying ourselves in this place. And before I could linger on this thought any longer, with a sweep of her arms, Maria agreed, pulling her belongings, which she had laid out carefully on the table, lipstick, eyeliner, tampons, a textbook, half a baguette, its open edge, ragged, torn off by hand, a pack of tarot cards, a bicycle helmet, though there was no bike in sight, an umbrella, its fabric printed with small rubber ducks, and a wallet that held several bills, a handful of coins, credit cards, and identification into her arms, brought Noel to his feet, and shoveled us out the door, the waiter following us to the exit, saying something beneath his breath. What exactly, I did not hear, his eyes bloodshot and hurt, stopping at the door, his face oblong and distorted through the Bovary's thick glass, enough to give me a sense of safety. As Maria, Noel, and I walked beneath the Porte de Peru and then down to the Place de la Comédie, through these giant inescapable structures which looked in their newest forms lumpy and rough, and we stood in the center and turned in circles, watching the people around us go about their lives, watching the tourists wander from cafe to cafe, from boutique to boutique, the street performers playing bad covers of Nirvana, juggling moldy oranges, stealing the wallets of unsuspecting passersby, a murder of crows, We'd been advised to not engage with them, though enterprising locals had taken to hunting the language-prone fowl, chattering like a group of old school friends about the day. Yet, in the midst of it all, there the waiter was again, still in apron, still watching us, following us, and I wondered if he had been sent by my host parents to record my location and goings on, wondered if they were here themselves, watching discreetly from the shade of a cafe, confused or amused at how curiously I was behaving, though for them this was not unusual, having followed me before, having studied my idiosyncrasies, feeling like they knew everything about me. For when I first arrived in Montpellier, early on, I'd performed for them, allowing them to study me in my crudest form, testing them to see how much they could endure, to see at what point they would step in, initially taking them in circles, going nowhere or exactly where they expected me to go. Class, lunch, library, class, all in the shortest, most direct routes. And I dreamed or I imagined suddenly changing course, veering away from the expected path, the path they thought I would take. Instead, suddenly entering a house set back from the street, breaking its glass door with a nearby brick, crusted with dirt, so that I dreamed I could then reach my hand through its empty frame and open it from the inside. However, this alone, entering sans permission, was not enough for my host parents, standing nervously along the property's thick hedges to intervene. So I went from window to window, held the brick in my hands, fracturing each one, stabbing the glass with the short end of the clay, each pane forming a web of cracks, splintering outward from the point of contact, wanting them to grasp what I was capable of. And as I did the same to the windows upstairs and the numerous mirrors, I heard my host parents' footsteps creak on the floors downstairs just below me, studying each pane, estimating the cost of replacing each one, debating the merits of casements versus double hung versus awning windows, picking uneasily at their cuticles, half horrified and half fascinated at what was taking place before them, not mentioning to one another the obvious. What if the owners come home and find us here? What have we gotten ourselves into? But just as soon as this thought may have passed through their minds, I was coming downstairs. I dreamed I was leaving through the shattered door, and moments later they followed, never to mention this to me, as I had expected, but rather to hold it like a collectible, a last resort. And when I told this to Noel, told him about this feeling deep in my gut, this bad feeling, the one that happens before an accident, a premonition, after having resumed my spinning, so as to appear inconspicuous, he laughed. And I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Oh, Dylan, that was wonderful. I don't know if you've run across it, but I highly recommend Hopscotch by Julio Cortázar. It's Paris in the 50s with an expatriate Argentine writer. You might find it interesting. Anyway, this brought it to mind. Wonderful stuff. Okay, our last finalist this evening is Nancy McKinley. Nancy is the author of short stories, novels, and essays. She lives in Fort Collins and has earned a PhD from State University of New York at Binghamton, receiving the John Gardner Newhouse Award, an MA from Colorado State University, and a BA from College of the Holy Cross, where she was one of the first females at the previously male school. A founding faculty member for the low residency Wilkes University Maslow Family Graduate Program in Creative Writing. That's too many words for me, I'm sorry. She teaches fiction and nonfiction and supervises the writer as teacher internships. She will be reading from her novel, St. Christopher on Pluto. Welcome, Nancy.
Hello, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Colorado Humanities and Center for the Book. I'm so honored to be here. Yes, tonight I'll read from St. Christopher on Pluto, a cutting of Navidad. Colleen yanks open the passenger door of Big Blue, rattling me in the car as she hoists onto the seat. Instead of her usual black attire, chosen for its supposed slimming effect, She wears a red sweater matched by a voluminous skirt that cascades over her knees. Ho ho, you like? Her fingers tug at silver garland edging the hem. My skirt was half price at Salvo. I smile, for Colleen takes pride in snagging deals from the Salvation Army thrift store. It's handmade, but the seams weren't finished. No clasp at the waist, so I used duct tape. And that's when I realize she's wearing one of those round felt covers people put under Christmas trees. I decide not to say anything. She's been a grump ever since she couldn't collect insurance for her car. Where's your holiday spirit, MK? Can't you do better than a green turtleneck? I point to my necklace. The strand of plastic miniature tree lights is quite festive if you ask me, but Colleen is on a roll. Are you depressed? She raises her eyebrows, arched like the curved tops of candy canes. Lots of people get depressed this time of year. I shift from park to drive. Big Blue scolds me for yet again giving Colleen a ride. We're taking the Anthracite Expressway to the Community Outreach Center at Our Lady of Perpetual Help Church. Colleen and I no longer belong to the parish, but we went there as kids, and recently she joined in their volunteer services. Today is the gift party for children from low-income families. Colleen's not sure exactly how many kids will attend because the center doesn't require parents to fill out forms like they do at Giving Tree or Toys for Tots. She said putting names on paper meant high risk for people lacking W-2s or green cards. A date with Santa could translate into deportation or jail time. This realization, heightened by visions of children being denied presents, prompted me to drive. Big Blue wheezes as I peer through the windshield. The sky, razor blade gray, has been dismal all week. Snow might soften the barren hills, but there's none in the forecast. Below us, the Susquehanna River cuts through northeast Pennsylvania like a vital force. Only it's not. I can hear my grandmother, who willed me this Buick eons ago. We have the longest non-navigable river in the United States, but it's not safe. Each winter, at least one vehicle turns too fast and plummets into the waters of the ever after. How easily Colleen and I could join the departed. I picture headlines rife with irony. 2 women check out while doing a good deed. Colleen is the reason we're doing Santa Fest. Undoubtedly, she thinks charitable work will erase the not-so-little fabrication of her missing car. What happened reeks of bad karma. And worse, she involved me by asking for a ride so she could drop off her Honda. I figured she was going to a mechanic and needed a return lift to the mall where we work. No way did I think she'd dump her car on the floodplain and claim it as stolen. Hers was the malfeasance of a deadbeat, not a middle-aged woman who works at the Hallmark store and organizes the mall parking lot cleanup day. Colleen's do-gooder action reflects a need for penance, but rather than admit her guilt, she elbows me in the side. Don't you love those decorations? Are we looking at the same place? Houses lean side by side. If one drops, they'll all collapse whoosh, like dominoes. Styrofoam candy canes dangle from porch rails, where paint peels like curled ribbon. Artificial wreaths are tacked to doors, and the few windows without plastic insulating them against the cold yield stick-on snowflakes. Icicle lights droop from roof gutters. Maybe they'll sparkle when lit, but the wires resemble wet spaghetti. Several yards have signs with red, white, and blue lettering. We support our troops. Then I spy the deflated blow-ups. Those decorations are pricey. I can't imagine how people can afford them. When filled with hot air from humming motors, they expand into a toy shop, snow globe, or gargantuan Santa. But flattened against dirt, they remind me of condoms littering the mall parking lot after a Saturday night. Nice Rudolph, smirks Colleen. 4 reindeer with mechanized heads line up in procession. The one in front flashes a red nose as the next deer sways its snout, sniffing Rudolph's butt. I pretend not to notice. Last year at the mall's employee party, Colleen made a meal of red and green Jell-O shots. Afterwards, I gave her a ride and she yelled, "Pull over!" I thought she was going to hurl, but as I stopped Big Blue, she hopped out, lumbered across the lawn, grabbed a couple of reindeer, and repositioned them in a Yuletide hump. We pass a stout plastic snowman, the kind my grandmother displayed back in the 70s. It's probably a collector's item from when coal was king and the farms thrived. Now people celebrate with acrylic stars atop molded nativity sets. I'd like to think real straw in mangers flanked by cows and donkeys offers reassurance. But for what? We're here, says Colleen, donning a Santa hat. The outreach center looks like a train car with narrow windows zippered into gray siding. Above the doorway, red and white lights flicker. I ease big blue curbside under a street lamp. We'll want light when we finish. Colleen plucks garland from her hem and crowns the St. Christopher statue on the dash. Keep us safe, St. Chris. Soon as I lock Big Blue, I notice a guy near the alley. He wears baggy jeans, weighted by a chain on his belt loop. The pants sag below his hips, showing the tops of boxers. His hair, flat along the sides, is buffeted up on his skull like the peak of a conquistador's helmet. He pivots and nods. Out marches a little girl in a pink fuzzy jacket, so big it hangs to the ankles of her white tights. She's followed by 4 more tots and a cluster of 10 bigger kids. Colleen struts, jangling bells on her skirt. Mira, says the guy, and I bet he means, look at her. Colleen's twice his age, yet she gets all flirty, rolling back her shoulders and grins. Ho, ho, the kids laugh. A boy wearing blue mittens claps. More little bodies bunch into the pack. These kids with dark eyes and straight black hair do not look anything like homegrown towheads. Where are they coming from? Shh, says Colleen. Then I remember her gag order. No asking where they live or how they got here. Thank you.
Nancy, that was very funny. I enjoy that. It brings to mind all kinds of things, but very nice, beautiful work. I don't know if we have questions for the fiction writers. Do we? If not, I'll ask them. I've got a few, or at least one. Andrew, I want to go back to Andrew. I guess a couple of things. One is influence and one is process. And I was wondering if you had encountered Robert Stone's Flag for Sunrise, because there were cadences in there that seemed to strike the same kind of chord. And then the other thing I was wondering is how do you integrate? Do you do a bunch of research at the beginning and then write the book, or do you do the research as you go along?
Well, as to the first question, I haven't read the Stone novel that you mentioned, but I've read a few of his books, and he's a writer I admire a lot, and I wouldn't have necessarily heard his own cadences in my own work, but I think like we have a kind of related interest in what Philip Roth called the American berserk. I mean, Stone is really one of the masters of writing it, and a lot of the sections of the Gringa that are set in the U.S. or that have to do with the U.S. I'm really kind of following, or I hope I'm following in that tradition. With research, it's kind of a never-ending process. I mean, part of the research for this book comes from having lived in Peru for a couple of years in the late 90s and spent a lot of time there in the decade after. And then when I started writing the book, I think I went back to Peru 5 or 6 times, anywhere from a week to a couple of months, just to talk to as many people as I could, journalists and activists and military veterans and, former militants. And, just the main thing for me was realizing that this was a story that in so many ways really wasn't my story to tell, and needing to feel that I was incorporating the voices of Peruvians to the greatest degree possible. And so that was a process, the beginning, middle, and the end. It never really stopped while I was writing the book.
Wow, that's I've only encountered that writing historical poems, and it never ends. Even after they're published, you're going, oh my God, I could have used that.
It's true.
There are some questions. There's a from Sarah Pritchard. She had a 2-part question from Nancy McKinley. One, which story in your book is the first one you wrote, starring M.K. and Colleen? And then it disappears. Oh, there it goes. I'm sorry, it went to another thing. 2, at what point in your writing did M.K. and Colleen let you know that they wanted you to write a novel in stories about their lives and community?
Okay, well, the story Signed, Sealed, Delivered is set when MK and Colleen are in middle school and at parochial school, writing salacious letters to soldiers in Vietnam from their hometown, and their exchanges back and forth. Actually, I went to Colorado State for my master's because I wanted to figure out how to write that story, but it took a long time for that story to coalesce and achieve the tone that I wanted for it. And in the course of finally working with that, certainly MK and Colleen are growing up. They were friends in parochial school, went to separate high schools, lost touch as young adults, but then reconnect in different jobs at a bankrupt mall. And so they kept wanting to do good while getting up to no good. And their antics really encouraged me to write more and more stories so that I could show how there is hope and humor in the struggle. They became a vehicle for me doing that.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I think that Mike Lester had a question for you about the how did you conceive of them? And maybe that answers it, but do you want to speak to that? How you were these based on your own childhood, real people, or how did you come about?
I certainly there are composites of all different people I've met in life. Often I was working with an image so that I could start a piece, maybe something I had seen or heard. And I wanted to bring out voices that are rarely heard by females from rural America, or at least I haven't heard them and seen them in fiction. So that was key to what I wanted to do. And I wanted to show how that these women are greatly resilient as they navigate life's difficulties. I wanted to bring a little light to the darkness, and they were showing me how I could do that. And often their, antics, they're revealed an indomitable spirit, and so that they became a vehicle for doing that.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I wish I could write that way. I don't have that skill at all. So let's see. Vidivara asks, has a question for Andrew. As you write and research and write, does the story pull you into it, influencing how you view the world as the research lives in your head? Is this, I guess part of the question is the story kind of independent? Is the movement of the story independent, or is it shaped by the history?
I think it's both. I think it's a conversation that goes back and forth between what's on the page and what's in your head and what's in the history books and what's in the conversations you have with people. The Gringa took me almost 8 years to write, and part of it was because there were so many voices and so much history to make sure that I was getting right or honoring in some way. And so it would be a kind of it would proceed in fits and starts, right? I mean, there would be things I knew that I wanted to write, but as I was writing them, they would raise more questions, and I would have to go back to the research process. And then in the research process, inevitably, you're learning more things that are changing your idea of how the story works and changing the direction of the novel. And then you go back into the writing, and then more questions arise, and so on and so on. And before you know it, almost a decade of your life has vanished into the book. But so it's really, you can't tease them apart at all. It's just this ongoing conversation.
Is it an ongoing book, or do you write other things at the same time?
With this book, it was everything. I could not sort of get onto any other projects or really concentrate on anything. I mean, there were times when I was writing less or more slowly or taking breaks, but in the 8 years that I was writing it, I really, except for, maybe an article or an essay here and there, I really didn't enter into any other serious projects.
Wow. I admire that. I'm not a long distance runner, so
No, I'm not.
Dylan, I had a question. Would you, first of all, I guess, the larger background of France. I'm curious about how you arrived at that. And then secondly, you've got a character, Megara, who is from Sri Lanka. And so you're sort of writing out of your own cultural background, and I'm wondering how those two kind of influenced each other as you wrote.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just started with this character's voice, and the rest fell into place. When I began writing this book, I didn't know that it was going to be set in France. I had taken, I'd spent like 2 weeks, maybe less, in Montpellier. Clearly my French is god awful, but I don't see that as me not being able to speak French should prevent me from, thinking and writing about this place in France that I thought really important. Particularly how this character fits in there.
Interesting. It's sort of a dialogue going on between your experience in France, and then is the character, you say it's a voice, and I'm familiar with that phenomenon. Is it like an inquiry then? Are you following the character and just happening to put her in France?
Yeah, I mean, the way I wrote this book, and I've talked about this before. Sorry for those who are listening who've heard me say that feel, but the way I wrote it was really a game. It was how long can I have the sentence? And in that way, nothing else was a concern for me. When I had this singular objective to continue this sentence, and of course there's a process of revision, and there's a process of research, and there's all these other steps that went into making this book. But when I think about how I made this, and that in that kind of nostalgia and fever dream of looking back, it really was that process of, can I add another 1,000 words to this sentence?
There's an interesting question here. Do you think in stream of consciousness when you write?
It depends what I'm writing. I'd say to a certain degree. This isn't the only text that I've written. It's the only text that I've published that's in this form, but it's not the only text that I've written. Kind of stream of approach. Going with
Yes, Mayor asks, your book is so innovative. What was the inspiration for the form? Did you start out thinking, I want to write something in this form, and it kind of flowed in, or did it arise out of the character?
I mean, it's a combination. I think I had an idea for this voice, and I had an idea of Megara. I'd spent had kind of spent time in Sri Lanka a while before I wrote it, and so that his voice was floating around, and I was reading these authors who were also playing around with that. So like Thomas Bernhard, Laszlo Krasznahorkai, Sebald to a certain degree. So these writers who are writing in these kind of long, dense sentences that I found as a young 20-something when I was reading them, like extraordinarily.
Interesting. Good stuff. Nancy, I've got a question for you. Can you speak to why you chose Northeast Pennsylvania as your setting? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to give voice to characters from Northern Appalachia, which is and that part of Pennsylvania is the northern brow of Appalachia. Typically, people will think West Virginia or, our area south of there. And so I felt it was important to illuminate an area that's rarely seen and seen that way. And at that point, I had been working with all the different stories in the piece. I had the characters, but suddenly the setting of Northeast Pennsylvania, because I was living there at that time, was a means for moving the vehicle forward, for getting it situated, because the area is rife with blight and beauty. And, to show those was a challenge and a joy. So.
That's great. It gives it a lot of energy. Ellen, another question for you. I am curious about how you edit, and when do you know when it's final? I'm going to take notes if you don't mind about your answer.
That's a great question. I certainly read pieces aloud. I have to hear them. I often went back and rephrased and reshaped characters, killed off the darlings, as we all have to do, tightened them. And sometimes relationships were developing with characters in the other stories, which I didn't realize until I started, putting them together. So I would have to heighten them. Once I knew my closing image, then I had finished editing, but it's a long process for me, certainly.
Good. Well, and that actually was a question for Dylan, but Dylan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said Nancy.
No, that's okay, because see, you may have smoothed the runway for him. How do you edit, and when do you know it's finished?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes. Now you can just say what you said. That's okay.
For this book, it was difficult to edit because it doesn't follow the grammar lessons we learn in elementary and middle school. So on sentence level, I really worked on the sonics of it, of how does reading this aloud change the breath and where can sentences be drawn out or where can lines be drawn out or compacted. In terms of the kind of plot, that took kind of time to go back and just hack away at it. I mean, I think that's the way that editing usually happens. Is it's just it's that process of tearing something apart to make it better.
Well, I like your comment about because now everybody's up on the screen, all of the writers, which is great. But I just wanted to circle back and see if there were any other questions that had popped up. And if not, I wanted to steer the question about that Dylan spoke to about cadence, because it seems to me that the three poets each has a completely distinctive sense of rhythm. And I don't know if there's anything illuminating you care to say about it or can say about it. It might be too subjective. But Linda, what do you think?
You mean individually or as a group?
Well, no, as you, for speaking as one of the three.
Well, I don't really try to have a rhythm. I don't think about it. I think I have my own inner music and voice that I hear when I'm writing, and probably that's what it is. But I also, if I concentrated on something like that, I would lose the meaning of what I'm trying to say.
Ah, okay, okay. Khadijah, do you feel similar or different about that?
You know, I think about sound quite a lot because I teach a unit for the undergrads and sometimes my grad students on sound poetry. So I try to think of sound as adding to the meaning. And when I'm revising, I definitely do revise for sound and rhythm. I don't know that I have a philosophy when it comes to rhythm, but I certainly use it as a tool for adding that extra layer of meaning.
Well, if you don't have a philosophy about sound, you're out of this meeting. So you have to, no. Aaron.
Yeah, I don't.
Speak to that same question.
I don't know that I have a philosophy of it either, but I'm certainly concerned with the music of the language, maybe even primarily, and maybe even at the expense of meaning. Not really, but when you mentioned sound poetry, I immediately thought of Urzinata. There's a part of me that believes that as all art allegedly long ago was framed as aspiring to the condition of music. Certainly, in my poems, I want them to bring as much music as possible, in addition to as much cinema and wisecracking and everything else. I mean, I think poetry, when it's running on all pistons, is better than a movie. As Frank O'Hara once said.
Okay, I'm going to change my answer. I think I hear it. So it's like a song already when I'm working, because I hear it, the voice, I hear it as I'm doing it.
That's interesting. Cool. Are we?
I don't go back and edit for sound.
You don't edit for sound?
No, I don't edit for form either.
If I go back and do that, I usually ruin the poem for me. Yeah, interesting. There are a couple of other questions. Let's see. Let's see, for Andrew. Andrew, your work read like nonfiction, and I'm not sure what that means, but how do you find your characters?
Well, I mean, I think maybe to the degree that this novel reads like nonfiction is because it's really set against a nonfictional background. I mean, the context of it is a 12-year counterinsurgency / dirty war that the Peruvian government fought against leftist forces, including the Shining Path and some other groups that completely devastated the country of Peru and killed 70,000 people over the course of 12 years. And while what happens with Leonora Gelb, my character, takes place in the aftermath of that, everything that everybody is doing and feeling and fearing is informed by this trauma that the country has only very recently exited from. And so, as far as finding the character, this central character's was inspired by, like I said, a real woman whose name was Lori Berenson, who spent 15 years in military prisons in Peru from 1996 until 2011, when she was finally paroled and eventually returned to the United States a few years later. And when I lived in Peru, it was a couple of years after she had first been arrested and tried, but it was still this very, very visible story in the news. It would come back into the headlines, pretty frequently. There would be new motions in her case, or Jesse Jackson would come down to Lima to sort of plead for leniency from the Peruvian government, Bill Richardson, the Clinton administration, then later the second Bush administration. And every time something like that happened, the whole thing, it would be almost a trauma narrative, right? The country would live through the whole thing again and again, and the press would go crazy, and she would be vilified left and right. And I was a 20-something expat sort of living down there with only a really foggy notion of the history that was going on all around me. And so this was a figure who found me, really. I mean, the story was so extraordinary and so complicated, and said so much about not only Peruvian history, but American history and our history of interventions in Latin America and the rest of the world. And it really never left me alone. It took me another 10, 12 years before I started thinking about writing the novel, but that character was with me the whole time, and everything that happened to her in the intervening years was something I was really paying close attention to. So to a certain extent, it's meant to read like nonfiction, although she and the characters themselves in the book are entirely imagined.
That's fascinating to me. I love that. There's this fellow Jim Hensinger. I don't know. He asked this funny question. Aaron, do you play Jenga with the books behind you to deal with writer's block?
These are not freestanding piles. They're much too expensive vertical bookcases that we get when they are on sale. And this beautiful office is not mine. It's my wife's study, although many of the books are mine. No, I do not play Jenga with him, although I have thought about trying to compose maybe a found poem. Not that I have that kind of free time, but lining the books up in some kind of order so that the titles write something out.
Why not? That really is. That's not a background. I thought that was.
Oh no. This is a background. It's just not my office.
Oh, it's real. It's just not yours. Okay.
Yeah, but it's my wife's. It's where she does her work.
Well, that's good. That's good. Anybody? Any other questions? Comments? Disputes? Oh, there's one. Linda, you started with, there is a cat in here. It is playing with something on the floor. If you hear something, please ignore it. And we thought that was the first poem you were reading.
No, but now I'm going to write that one.
Yeah, that's good. They've even marked the line endings. That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I had my cat was in my box of wires, and I have like I have telescopes that I use when I go outside with my camera.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I guess we are winding down here. Josephine, are you stepping in? There she is.
Yes, thank you, Joe, so much for this and all you do for Colorado Humanities and Colorado poetry and writers. Are you going to be able to start up at the book bar again? Are you going to do that again, Joe?
Yeah, we're going to start up at book bar again, probably in August. We're going to start with, some of you may know or may not know that if you know the wonderful poet, haiku poet, Gary Schroeder, who was a great friend of mine. He passed away from cancer a few months ago. And so we're going to begin with a tribute reading for Gary. And we're just in the early stages of putting that together.
Thank you. So,
Thank you, everyone. It's been really wonderful.
What a joy. What an amazing night of writing and raucous stories and poetry. And I wrote down, it's a song already when I'm writing, Linda. Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, we all, as writers, we all know that experience when you're in flow and it's already musical. So just thank you all for such a rich evening.
Thank you, too.
Yes.
Fantastic reading. Thank you, everyone.
Best of luck to everybody.
Yep. So
I can't wait to get all these books now.
I know, and you know where to get them at the book bar. They'll mail them to you. And I want to thank everyone for staying in and logging on with us tonight. We'd love to hear what you thought about the program, either in the chat or you can send an email to info@coloradohumanities.org. Your suggestions are always welcome. Again, thanks to Outskirts Press and the Colorado Sun. If you reach out to them for services or support, please let them know you're there because they support the Colorado Center for the Book at Colorado Humanities. And please support local businesses by ordering books from our book bar. Next week, we will hear from our finalists in the mystery and the thriller categories. And that reading will be Wednesday, May 26th at 7 p.m. It'll be our last finalist reading in the series this year. Winners will be announced at a celebration event June 26th at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. Stay tuned to our website and social media, and do opt into our newsletter at the bottom of any page at coloradohumanities.org for readings and celebration updates. Stay well, everyone. Thank you.